Hi guys, welcome back to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host, as always, Steve Hall, and today I have Borge Fagerli back on the show. He is a world-renowned strength and fitness coach, but he is also very well known for inventing the Myo-Reps technique, an intensity technique that no doubt you've heard of, probably even used, and we discuss exactly what it is, the benefits over traditional sets, and also the updates that he's made to his recent book that he's published, and so you'll be able to get all the insights into that. We'll also discuss over the last years when we haven't been chatting on a podcast because it's been quite a while since me and Børge chatted. What has he learned? Some of the biggest ways that he's learned is challenging his preconceived biases, and one way of doing that, he hired Cliff Wilson as his coach. So you'll learn some of the things that he learned from Cliff and how challenging his biases has been fundamental to him progressing. We also touch on some of the challenges that the scientific literature provides and how you shouldn't just try and copy studies, and how sometimes the scientific literature doesn't agree with what bodybuilders are doing in practice, and how you can learn from both and bring them together to be truly evidence-based in your own practice. And I think there was just some really great touch points. In addition to that, we also talk heavily about autoregulation, which I think was invaluable, and how individualization and personal psychology really are important and pivotal parts of creating the program for yourself. So loads of gold within this episode. As a reminder, guys, at Revive Stronger, we mostly spend our time doing online coaching with our clients, whether or not they are physique competitors, or they're looking for a photo shoot, or they're just looking to become their fittest and best selves. We work them on a one-on-one basis with really in-depth personalized check-ins and get them to their desired outcomes and goals, but doing it in a way so they understand the process, they can learn along the way too. We work with a lot of actual coaches as well, so it's a great opportunity to not only develop your own physique and confidence, but also learn along the way, and we love doing that. So if you ever want to learn more about our online coaching and set up a consultation with myself or one of our coaches, you can find that linked in the description. But without further ado, let's get stuck into the chat with Børge. Børge, I know we were chatting online and said it'd been 6 years since you've been on the podcast, and I'm kind of embarrassed by that, but I think there's maybe a reason for it too, which we'll get onto later. And that was episode 84, so we're now at episode over 400 now, so it's kind of a lot's changed for both of us. We're both in different locations, I think, at this point as well, and we're talking about all things Myo-Reps at that point. And so if people aren't aware of who Børge is, he is the founder of Myo-Reps, and even back then, it was very well known within our space, and I think generally, but I think it's grown exponentially since then even, and a lot of people are very well know well of that technique. And so, especially our audience, I think a lot of them probably have used it or have at least heard of it. But Børge, if they haven't, if they're not aware of it or they don't know exactly what it is, do you have like a simple explanation for them?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's if you've ever heard of rest pause training, then it's very similar to that. Some will say it's a copy of it, of DC training or dog crap training. But there's like a very important difference that I'll get back to. But it's basically just a way to extend the set. I mean, in any given set, beyond using the very heavy loads, when you're using moderate or lighter loads, to get a stimulus for hypertrophy and also strength, it's generally accepted, although some don't think so, but I think so, that you need to push the set closer to failure. You need to have some type of effort, or else you would, grow from just doing a ton of warm-up sets, and I don't think that's very plausible. So pushing that set close to failure it's generally assumed that, well, depending on the individual, training advancement, exercise, range of motion, many different variables, we can assume that the last half of the set is more effective for stimulating muscle growth than the first half, simply because that's the highest effort part of the set. So my thinking at the time was that instead of then resting for 2 to 5 minutes and restarting the process of getting to the point where you're stimulating the most muscle growth, why not just rest for a brief period of time and then do several mini sets where essentially all of the reps you're doing are stimulating muscle growth. So it's based on the assumption that we need to have high effort. We need the rep speed to slow down by the very fact that the load is sufficiently heavy. You're fatiguing sufficient muscle fibers to get to the point. And there's like something called the force velocity relationship, which means that to get the highest internal tension on the muscle fibers, rep speed needs to slow down, whether that's from the load being sufficiently heavy or it's being close to the point of failure, doesn't seem to matter. So all of the muscle fibers will participate as long as effort is high, whether it's due to load or pushing close to failure on moderate loads. So staying at that point just requires you to take a few deep breaths of rest when you put the weight down in order to actually be able to do more reps. And then repeat several mini sets until we'll have some rules involved in the Myo-Rep training system to tell you where it's probably more like there needs to be a balance between stimulus and recovery. So that's why I have some auto-regulation aspect involved there. Another very important point that I developed this in 2005, and already back then I sort of have had an intuition that failure or fatigue should be managed, not chased. And this, with the research that we've seen throughout the years, have only confirmed my suspicions that managing fatigue in order for the stimulus to fatigue ratio being the highest we can achieve means that you get stimulus, but you don't prolong recovery unnecessarily. So managing fatigue by staying within 1 to 2 reps in reserve seems to be a very essential part of making this type of rest pause training work. And in my experience, there also seems to be some unique aspect of this type of training, whether it's the metabolic stress or whatever is going on with muscle recruitment patterns that seems to be make it more efficient, more effective in the long term. But the studies we have, at worst, indicates that this type of training is equally effective as traditional training. Some studies indicate that it's more effective, and my hunch is that it simply pushes you to push. It kind of pushes you to train closer to the point of failure. Whereas some tend to hold back subconsciously and have more reps in reserve than they actually think. But this type of training tends to push them closer to the point where every rep, every set is actually stimulating. So that's the shortest overview I can provide. And obviously, even if it's just as effective as traditional sets, from the research we have, it shows us that one Myo-Rep set, the equivalent in traditional sets is like 2 to 4 sets. And that will take 2 to 3 times more time to complete than a single Myo-Rep set. So it's a great time saver.
You mentioned, actually, I think people love counting their sets, of course. That's become like a real thing in terms of, that seems to be the thing that people care about for volume, for good reason, I think, as long as they're close to failure, of course. You mentioned it's equivalent to 2 to 4. What does a Myo-Rep set look like for you? Like, what is that like equivalent if you put it into a practical example, say?
Yeah, so let's say you're using a 10 rep max load and you were to push to failure on every set, and you did it the traditional way. Then you would get 10 reps on the first set, you'd rest for 2 to 4 minutes, and because of the fatigue from the first set, you might get 9 reps on the second set, and then 8 reps on the third set. With a Myo-Rep set, you would preferably stop at 8 or 9 reps, staying at 1 to 2 reps in reserve. Short rest, then do another mini set of 3 reps, short rest, mini set of 3 reps, and then for as long as needed to until fatigue causes you to stop. But generally 8 plus 3, 3, 3, 3, something like that.
Cool. Okay. So that's like one straight set plus 4 or so clusters is equivalent to 2 to 4 straight sets for people that are kind of wandering in that sense.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're counting, there's another model by Chris Beardsley called the stimulating reps model, and he is working from the assumption that the 5 final reps of every set, if you push to failure, are the most stimulating. Now, some have interpreted that as being a hard breakoff point where only the 5 reps are effective and the first 5 are ineffective. That's not what I'm saying at all. There's like a curve where you kind of begin peaking the effect towards the end of the set. So you generally just stay at the peak part of the set by inserting the short rest and doing additional reps at that point to stay at that maximum stimulating level. But again, managing fatigue becomes more important because the nature of rest pause training or myo-reps makes them more stressful and fatiguing. So we kind of need to manage the fatigue to not overdo things and cause way more recovery time because then you're kind of missing out on the benefits. You're just adding more volume, yes, for sure. But if it takes you more time to recover from that single myo-rep set than 3 traditional sets, then that will affect your training frequency. And in my experience, as long as you're just doing 1 myo-rep set and you're managing fatigue the way I recommend, then you can recover just as quickly. And by managing fatigue, you can actually recover sooner than if you were to train traditional sets to failure. That's also something we have research to prove.
Yeah, I think everything you've mentioned there makes complete sense. And I would say I don't think it's a direct copy at all of rest pause, at least from my understanding, and particularly because I feel like it's a bit more of a refined version of rest pause, where similar to thinking about, hey, the bros might have used momentum to get to a short position, and we're now thinking about maybe we'll do a length and partial, not worry about getting short and not introducing that momentum together, kind of like we're refining it with science and updating it, which is something that you're really good at there, Børge. So yeah, I appreciate the explanation. And I mean, a big reason what prompted me to bring you back on was seeing that you launched your ebook again, because I know you already had it out there. But I imagine you've added quite a bit in here, and there's been plenty of research in the time that you had the original one out there. So I don't know if there's any like big updates in there that you kind of were excited to have included that come to mind.
It's a completely new book. I mean, I just threw the old one away and started from scratch.
Nice.
So there's probably no single sentence that's the same in there. Well, you can probably find one, since I tend to formulate myself in specific ways. But the old book was like 75 pages. It was like based off a couple of articles, an article series. I just kind of synthesized that and curated it and put it into an ebook format. But this one I just started writing from scratch, and it's 273 pages. So it's it's 235. So it's way more. I just started from the training variables, the reps, the volume, the loads, failure, fatigue management, stimulus to fatigue ratio. Just try to piece together the full picture of at least my understanding of how to train for optimizing gains. And frequency being a big part of this puzzle, because we generally, at least I do, try to get in more. If you can stimulate the muscle to grow more often and you can recover faster, then at least in theory, it should be able to achieve more rapid muscle growth. But managing the fatigue aspect also becomes more important, because I tend to think that most just overdo things based off of the research we have that tends to inflate the importance of volume in shorter term studies, and me having worked as a coach for almost 30 years, I just tend to see that that doesn't work long term. I tried that myself. I've had plenty of advanced clients all the way up to the Olympia level. And over time, it tends to catch up to you. So pushing yourself to the brink of fatigue constantly, it can work for 8 to 12 weeks, which is incidentally the length of most studies. And then it tends to catch up to you. And this is something they saw all the way back in, like, one of the best books I read on training physiology is Physiology of Strength by Theodore Hedinger, and it's from the 60s. And they studied like thousands of subjects at the Max Planck Institute in Germany. And they saw the same trend. Those that had the most rapid gains after about 10 to 12 weeks, they started to plateau, stagnate, and regress. Whereas those who took their time to progress could continue doing so for a longer period of time. So to me, I just found I need to piece all of this together and present it in an understandable format and lay out my arguments for why I believe individualizing training should be the most important aspect. Research can only take us so far because they all have their weaknesses. It's a game of averages. It's a short-term focused period of time. The study subjects may not be representative of every individual reading that book, or you and me for that matter. And my experience as a coach tends to sometimes confirm the research, but very often it contradicts it. And I've always been more interested in the cases that I couldn't get great results in, and try to troubleshoot that and see what systematic process do we need to apply to make everyone grow. So, I mean, I used to coach fitness and bodybuilding, also competed myself. And I would have at most 5 clients competing, and 3 or 4 of them would have top 3 placings, whereas other would have maybe 20 to 50 clients and get 2 to 3 top placings. So statistically, I soon began to realize that my way of adjusting and individualizing every program is the key to actually, crack the code on muscle growth. We can only apply the general principles, but there needs to be some sort of systematic process to fine-tune for each individual. And that's where I believe the art meets the science, so to speak. And I try to communicate that through the book, include a couple of chapters on nutrition, and most importantly, the mindset side of things, which is hugely underestimated, the psychology of things. And doesn't mean we all have a brain. It's full of biases. We can't always trust our emotions, but whether we like it or not, they will determine how much effort we put into things. So enjoying our training and enjoying the process and the way life interacts with optimal tends to decide. Sorry, it's just my son wanting to be part of the recording. Ultimately determines the results we're going to get. So we can't just ignore it completely. We need to be taking that into account as well. So I tried to make this book just like a mirror of my way of coaching, my philosophy, and hopefully provide some nuance and interesting perspectives on the whole process to the readers out there.
I think the book sounds really good in terms of it's not just Myo-Reps. It's a very comprehensive book. Like you said, there's nutrition in there. It gives your perspectives of autoregulation, which as I've trained for longer, coached more people, when you truly understand kind of how to autoregulate, that allows you to then kind of individualize like you might with a diet. Hey, you can't just give the same people the same diet. You have to adjust it based off their weigh-ins, their mindset, like how their lifestyle, everything that's going on, and you take that into consideration. But training, I think people struggle with that sometimes. And you made some really good points in regards to the science. Like obviously this podcast is very science-based or I prefer evidence-based to science-based, because obviously evidence-based brings into your kind of personal experiences there too, which I think are super valuable. And the more experience you have as a coach, such as yourself, 30 years, I think it becomes even more valuable. And you realize...
I mean, for sure. You probably seen this yourself. I mean, you can try to the best of your abilities to predict results. And then that's not what you see in the real world. So whenever science or, some expert says that this is the way it should be, and it fails the real world check, then you need to figure out how. And as a coach, the more you work with clients and the longer you work with them, you begin to recognize patterns. And those patterns can be correlated with the science. But again, it just kind of, becomes more of an art than a science that the coach's eye is not, it's not always easy to put into words or teach someone else to do what you're doing. But you probably know this as well, that clients can be very unpredictable. Something should be happening and it doesn't, and you need to work with the information they tell you, and sometimes they don't tell you everything. So it's like many different pieces of a puzzle that needs to be put together.
Yeah, it's really well said. There's times of which I think every coach will probably have, if you've been working as a coach long enough. You have people, they must be extreme ends of the bell curve. They're not that average individual. And rather than trying to fit them into that average box, you have to work with them and work with what you're seeing. One random example that comes to mind, Børge, was I was working with someone and we were peaking, and the amount of calories and carbohydrates that we had to give him were just obscene. And it just wasn't budging his weight or his look. And it's just like, this just doesn't make sense. He should be gaining, he was legitimately should be gaining pounds of body fat at this point with the amount that we're putting in there. But I was having to go off what I could see and what I was getting told from the client, because you can't just, again, trust a textbook or a scientific paper to give you what you should do as a coach in a given situation. But it sounds like this book is giving coaches and trainees tools to be able to be better at that as well themselves. So I'll definitely make sure the book is linked in the description so people can check that. But I just wanted to kind of talk about it a little bit briefly, because I think it's something that is incredibly like a great principle, and I think people would be very interested. But I didn't want to talk the entire podcast about it, because I think you probably have talked about it a lot across various spaces, but also in the time that we haven't been able to come on here and chat, I've been still following you as an individual. And I think it was this book spawned me to bring you on, but before that I was already seeing your work come out. It was maybe after the last year or so where you kind of re-emerged onto social media, particularly like Instagram. That's where I spend a bit more time, and also on YouTube. So I just seen your posts coming up, and they'd been I think you do good posts, and they're very interesting and make me think a little bit differently, because you do think a little bit differently to a lot of the people that I follow, which I've enjoyed. And obviously, like we said, a lot of time has passed. So I did have the question of, over the last 6 years, what comes to mind if I ask you training, nutrition, mindset, it could be, that comes to mind when you think about things that you've changed your perspectives on as a coach?
I think I've become more aware of my own biases. So I constantly question my own beliefs. And that's why we have the same coach, Cliff Wilson. And I intentionally chose Cliff because I knew that he had a different training philosophy than I did. And I really wanted to try to push my own boundaries in terms of volume and frequency and just to see, could I respond better to that than to my own type of training. And I guess to cut a long story short, it seemed to be somewhere in the middle, I responded well to the higher volumes, but I also ended up becoming more and more overtrained. And like he just kept telling me, well, you look better when you're tired. So I don't want you to pull back. But I was like, well, if I can't work, I can't sleep, I'm moody and angry with my wife and my son, then I don't think it's worth it. So I need to find something that's at least sustainable so I can keep doing it for a while. But definitely being pushed out of my comfort zone in terms of training volume and what I can actually tolerate was a very good thing for me, because I would be more of this high frequency, low volume kind of guy. And being able to also develop a framework for playing with, experimenting systematically with the volume and the frequency has been quite a game changer in my coaching and for myself as well. So I will now have clients that are responding extremely well to just one set every other day. And I have other clients at the opposite end of the spectrum doing like a Dorian Yates type split with anything from low volumes to really high volumes. So it's like it really expanded how I train my clients, and I'm better able to individualize, I think, by actually going outside of my comfort zone and challenging my own beliefs. So I think that's been the most the biggest lesson since then.
That's really cool. I feel like I've gone through a similar journey the last couple of years at least, where I've kind of had my ways of doing things and maybe followed a bit more of a, I don't know, it might be a textbook or a person I look up to and following kind of that methodology. And now I'm kind of getting a bit more confidence in my own experience and what I'm seeing with clients, and seeing good results by making it a little bit different and just experimenting too, like you've said there. And similarly, the reason I chose Cliff, although he's not doing my training at the moment, I say that because I think I might end up giving the reins there at some point, because I want to learn that side too. But nutritionally, even like things like the protein intakes he's got me on, they're much higher than I typically have me on, but I'm learning, and it's interesting. And same with kind of Monday weigh-ins is always one that I'm like, oh, the Monday weigh-in, what's it going to be? I don't want to try and manipulate that one, whereas I've always taken kind of frequent weigh-ins and taken averages. But for Cliff is a great example of someone with loads of experience who is evidence-based for sure, but maybe experiments more than your average evidence-based coach does for sure. And he's got great results and a great track record. So I think it's great that you push yourself out of your comfort zone in that regard and look to broaden your horizons and learn a bit more.
Yeah, and I think that's eventually where we end up. I mean, I have like one long form article where I discussed Bruce Lee's philosophy, experiment, discard what doesn't work, and take what's working and what's useful. So that's one big part of it. And I also have a post on Instagram where I discuss some will rely on one source of information, and if that source is a scientist, a researcher, and even the researchers are full of biases, and even though they come to some sort of conclusion, they will say we still need more data, we still need more evidence. But the social media tends to take that conclusion and run with it like it's a fact, and suddenly it's a hype, suddenly it's a trend, high volumes and lengthened partials and whatever. So I wanted to highlight that there are pros and cons with the research. It's a game of averages. We don't know whether the subjects involved are serious lifters with years of training experience. Very rarely are they. They're doing some great stuff at the Samuel Buckner's lab, and also at Eduardo de Sousa's lab, and in Florida. So they have more advanced, physique competitors, and I generally, put more weight on that. But still, and also as Samuel Buckner has pointed out, we see like 1 to 2 millimeters of muscle growth in an 8 to 12 week study, and we probably can't extrapolate that into infinity. So we need to take that with a grain of salt. It's a like very short-term focus period of muscle growth. that, you put people back in the study later and they lost the muscle and then they regain it back. So if you only rely on that source of information, you will probably end up doing that as well. Whereas on the other side, you have the coaches. You have those that just kind of disregard the science because, I do what works and I see what works in my clients, and they're only observational and still, I believe, systematic, and they're able to tease out, I did this and that worked, so that must mean there's something to it. And they're able to follow their clients for a longer period of time. But again, muscle growth is hard to measure. You introduce nutrition and sometimes steroids, very often pharmaceuticals involved in many of the most famous physiques. And that kind of changes the picture completely. So you need to keep context in mind when you try to apply the methodology, whether it's the research or the coach, or the, pro on social media that, everyone should be training like me because look at how great I look. Let's everyone train like Chris Bumstead. That's obviously not going to work. So synthesizing and curating those two approaches, taking what works and what doesn't, go inside, start experimenting like you and I did. We need to be our own lab. We need to go out in the gym, know what to look for, know what to measure, know variables to tune and how they interact with physiology, and then make qualified decision based off of that. Instead of, well, I did this and it worked really well, but this new study said something else, so it can't work. That's not the way you should approach it. So I just kind of want to, it's like I'm getting a little fed up with the whole pendulum swinging and this new study approach, which is hyped up on social media. Like we kind of tend to reinvent the wheel all the time. I mean, lengthened partials. Who remembers positions of flexion from Ironman? Probably 20 years ago. The new generation probably don't, but the ones that have been in the game for a while, everything that's been promoted these days, we've seen it before. It's nothing new. Perhaps more refined, and with new research, more understanding, more knowledge. And if only the coaches and the scientists could talk together instead of fight all the time, and we could all be, helping each other to understand this great mystery of how to create optimal hypertrophy in every single individual. What actually drives hypertrophy and what constraints do we need to work with? Then we're getting somewhere. Instead of everyone is just looking for this magic recipe that, should just work for everyone. That's just not possible, I think, because everyone is a unique snowflake, even though we share the same physiology and organism. There's so many variables involved that can be manipulated and affect each other. We have the genes, we have the hormones also deciding ultimately how big you're going to get. So, how fast you get there probably doesn't really matter all that much, but let's at least make sure that you enjoy the process getting there and that you're actually able to get there without getting injured or burnt out or, lose motivation and, start doing drugs instead.
You
so
touched
that was
on
rant of the day. Sorry.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think you touched on some really good points because I've seen similar frustrations, and sometimes I'm frustrated at it as well. And I always try and take a step back and be like, try and understand why. It's just social media and it's sound bites that get repeated. And I think it's unfortunate because I think it has got to a point where it feels like someone posting on social media, it's almost if you don't have a PubMed link to kind of give someone for why you're doing a certain thing, then you can't talk about it. You can't talk about your opinion on things. It's like you have to have some sort of resource to back that up. And I can see coaches getting frustrated in that regard, or just advanced trainees with lots of experience and hey, this has worked for me. And at the same time, it's not helping them by disregarding new evidence that's coming through and could help aid what they're doing. So it's like you said, when you can come together and come in the middle there and have an understanding, that's where the gold is. And it's, people like to poo-poo, I think, on individualization, but I do think I've seen it to be really important because, like you said, we're very, very similar. So yeah, the broad strokes of, we all have to train close to failure with an amount of volume that causes a stress response, which is probably similar to, like, to some extent, that range is going to work for you, but that's a big range.
It's
and
a big range.
You need plenty of protein. You need to probably be in a surplus to maximize growth, but the like details within all of that can be quite different person to person, especially if you, again, are working with outliers. Like you said, you work with people who are struggling to see results. So the people who just grow from whatever, like they're probably not maybe not the people to get your advice from.
They don't want my advice because they're growing just nicely. And sometimes I set up a program for someone which is meant to be a starting point, and they're so happy with the progress that I never hear from them again. So that's fine and dandy, but it's still, well, maybe we could optimize it and adjust it over time. But again, it's just way more interesting for those that are really struggling to figure out what variable to tweak and tune, and suddenly, they start gaining. And that's the most, that's where I learn the most.
Do you not see the progress you would like? Are you sick of writing your own programs? Or perhaps you need some accountability in order to stick with a plan? Then it's time to start working with us. We at Revive Stronger offer a truly personalized coaching service. You'll get more than just an email with some macros or random cookie cutter program. With Revive Stronger, you will be the center of our attention. You will receive your own fully individualized training protocol alongside a customized nutritional strategy. We created the coaching around your needs, wants, personal preferences, and your own unique lifestyle. Every single week, we delve into your program in order to make appropriate adjustments so that we get the most out of your time and the best possible outcome. We help both female and male athletes to seriously change their body composition by adding more muscle mass and decreasing fat tissue. No matter if you're a competitive bodybuilder or just want to look better, if you need help with your progress and taking your physique to the next level, our coaching is for you. It's time to make a change. Sign up today and let's revive stronger.
You mentioned autoregulation a few times. Do you have like a set of tools that or do you get feedback from your clients to try and autoregulate the program? What are you looking at to autoregulate in terms of, I don't know, set volume, frequency, that sort of thing?
Yeah, well, I mean, the most familiar one is the velocity loss, and that's, again, what I based the original Myo-Rep training off of. Whenever rep speed noticeably slows down, you should probably end the set, as for the Myo-Rep set, which is an extended set, that's the point sufficiently close to failure where it's a good idea to balance your stimulus to fatigue. I also tend to use rep drops. So, and again, like what the fatigue tells us is like the direct feedback mechanisms to what's happening inside the muscle. And without going into, deep into the cells here and the physiology behind it, there are fatigue mechanisms that will ultimately decide whether you're able to repeat your performance from set to set, rep to rep, and set to set. So whenever that performance drops off noticeably without any influence, so for instance, if you have really short rest periods, then of course that will limit, you will induce a certain type of fatigue there. But if you're already resting like 2 to 4 minutes and you still see a noticeably dramatic drop off in rep performance from set to set, then that probably means that you shouldn't be doing a high volume program. Whether it's fiber types, whether it's your nervous system, whatever is going on, perhaps you are insufficiently recovered from last time. To me, that just has a high correlation with training results. So I have clients and programs where I just tell them to do between 2 to 5 sets, but stop whenever you lose 2 reps from one set to the next, or 3 or 1, depending on the amount of fatigue that we are willing to accept according to the frequency. So if you want to train every muscle group 3 times per week, we should probably not allow a lot of fatigue on each individual workout, because then you wouldn't be recovered for the next workout. And this is just based off of patterns. If we induce more fatigue, then if you try to do a full body routine 3 times per week, we don't see progression. And that's ultimately what tells us if the volume to frequency balance is correct. Are you progressing over time consistently? One bad workout here and there is fine, but if you just keep regressing over the next few weeks, then something is off. And if you allow for a lower frequency, then you can also allow for more fatigue within a given workout. And if you switch exercises that are sufficiently different, so for instance, a bench press and an incline bench press, then you hit different segments of the muscle, and you can probably allow for the same fatigue in both exercises and get a higher total volume for that muscle group. But not if you do a barbell curl and a dumbbell curl, and those are too much overlap for actually being able to auto-regulate off of that rule. And so in general, that works well for adjusting the volume. Another method I use, and by the way, Mike Touchier, world record holder in powerlifting and also a very famous coach, he talked about these rules way back many years ago. And I believe he even got them from some Russian research. So these are time-tested techniques. They're not like made up or pulled out of my ass. And in powerlifting, with low reps, you have the load drop. So in that case, let's say you do 3 reps with 100 kilos. For the next set, you will reduce the load by 5%. 5% also incidentally being similar to 2 reps if we go by one of our max calculators. And then you do sets of 3 reps with 95 kilos until that reaches the same level of effort as the first, like the initial set. And then you can also see how some will end up doing only 2 sets because their performance drops so much from one set to the next that they can barely get the 95 kilos with 3 reps and 100 on the first. Whereas some can just keep going forever. They just have sort of, the capability of tolerating that volume. And they will also progress just nicely. They will come back later, 2 to 3 days later, and repeat the same lift, do the bench press again, and be able to do 5 to 8 sets of 3 reps and be gaining. They added load since last time even. So these auto-regulation strategies do require you to be more experienced. I don't have great success with them in more novice or intermediates, simply because they're not sufficiently familiar with their own ability to push themselves. And I always have new clients recalibrate their ability to push to failure. So we always try to do 1 set to failure just to see where that failure point is. Have them send me a video of their performance. Well, you probably had, 2 more reps in you, even though you were struggling there. So some are just not used to pushing really hard, and some are used to pushing hard all the time and needs to be held back a little more. So telling them to stay within 1 to 2 reps in reserve can be just that very thing that makes the progress take off again. But all of these are to say that, which reminds me, there was this recent study that was just posted on social media where serious lifters were using auto-regulation strategies. And
I saw this.
You saw that study? Yeah. Did you see my comment on it?
I didn't see your comment, so I'm interested to hear what you say.
Yeah, exactly. And I just pointed out there's like 2 perspectives to that study. What they did was that one group just followed the same program, same volume, same progression, everything. And the other group was allowed to add 2 sets if they felt like they had more, and subtract 2 sets, like do two less sets if they felt fatigued and tired. And I think it was 10 or 12 weeks, and the gains were the same between groups. So the interpretation was that autoregulation is no better than just following the program. So you shouldn't trust your feelings. You should just look at your performance. And as long as you're performing well, you can just stick to the program. My perspective is, well, you can actually use autoregulation and get the same gains. And if you are allowed to take it easy on the days you just don't have it in you, you're tired, you didn't sleep well, you dread going to the gym, but you just, feel like you have to. And some days you just feel like $1,000,000 and you're able to do more volume those days. Then that will probably have something to say for your long-term gains, your ability to sustain the habit of going to the gym, your motivation. I know my motivation just takes a deep dive if I know I have to do 10 sets today, and after 5 sets, I'm just ready to quit. If I constantly have to push myself to 10 sets, then my motivation will drop. So regardless of performance, I think that again just shows us that we should always take psychology into account. And so just 2 different perspectives on the same study. So even if autoregulation doesn't provide us more gains, I can take issue with that study because perhaps there are other ways to autoregulate that would work better. I've seen it work really well in my clients and myself. But even if it doesn't, I strongly believe that taking into account how you feel that day will over time be what allows you to become better. And even Cliff has said that with the serious trainees, those that are competing at a really high level, what he tries to teach them is to know their own bodies, become aware of their own fluctuations in energy levels, and push when they can and hold back when needed. And that tends to be a success criteria in those that are just consistently doing well on stage year after year after year. So that's my takeaway.
Some really good points there again. With the rep drop off makes complete sense. I've actually talked to Menno about this as well before. I know you guys years ago worked together, so I think there's that was maybe an influence, and it makes so much sense in my kind of when I've worked with people as well. I did have a quick question on that, not to ignore the rest of the things you said. Do you notice when people are doing higher reps, they see a larger rep drop off, but as a percentage, it might be similar. So if they're doing, a set of 20, they might see 4 reps drop off, but that's similar to doing 10 and then 8 reps. Have you seen that happen?
Oh yeah, for sure. And again, perception. So some just hate high reps. I did a post on this as well. Some hate it. I hate it. And I probably can't trust my feelings a lot when it comes to high reps. I don't do a lot of it. I do believe that it should be a part of your long-term strategy, even though some are claiming that it's worthless. But I have clients that just love high reps. They love the feeling. They push themselves really hard and can do sets across 20 rep sets, 5 sets of 20. They get the pump, the fatigue, the burn, whatever, they just thrive on it. But whenever you have them do a set of 5 reps with a heavy load, they just hate working out. They don't want to do it. So again, psychology plays such a big role. And obviously most are in the middle, the bell curve and all that. But I have outliers that hate high reps and love low reps. And I have outliers that just love high reps and hate low reps. Why should we tell them differently? Why should we insist that they should hate their training? will these people actually be training in another 10 to 20 years if we constantly tell them to do stuff that they hate? I agree that we should push outside of our comfort zones, like I did when it comes to volume and reps. I also do high reps once in a while, strategically. But in general, I think at least 80% of your time should be spent doing things that you enjoy, the exercises you enjoy, the rep ranges, the volume you enjoy, and then occasionally push into those boundaries, upper and lower bounds of the volume and the frequency and whatever, to see if there's some additional gains to be had there. But again, we shouldn't underestimate the importance of psychology and liking and perception. But to answer your question, it really depends. I've seen some. To me, if I do a set of 20 reps, I can barely get 15 on the next. Whereas I can just do endless sets of 3. But I have a client that she sends me a training log. It's 5 sets of 20. And she pushed herself really hard on all those sets. But she just loves it and gains off it like crazy. That was the one thing that really made her gains take off. I just allowed her to do a lot of 20 rep sets. She used to do low rep programs and just got stuck over and over again.
Nice. Yeah, I think I think there's a clear reason why this happens, where I see the thing people enjoy, they often get better results from. Like I just see them moving towards what do they enjoy, what do they like, what feels good, and they get better results. I'm not necessarily saying they absolutely know what drives the best results, but just enjoying it seems to be at least causative of getting more results from it, and that could just all be psychology. So I think your reasoning there is completely fair and good. And you mentioned the RPE stops as well, which I only used when I used to powerlift a little bit, like literally 10 years ago. So I haven't used those for a while, but I think that's a wise method as well. And there's some autoregulatory tools I use in addition to those. And I don't know how you feel about them. You probably heard of kind of the pump disruption, elements like that, this kind of trying to identify how much stimulus have I driven within a given muscle for that set. And you mentioned kind of readiness is what I would term kind of, do you feel like you can handle more? Do you feel like you're near your limits? Is it too much? Maybe your performance is down. I kind of use a readiness tool. I don't know if you like those short-term proxies of like pump, feeling of local fatigue, like you've given that muscle a good go. Do you put much stock in those at all? And I think to your point of being a more well-trained advanced lifter, I think is important to use those properly as well, because I found people don't have a good gauge of those until they've been lifting for a good time.
Yeah, and I always, I have a progress report that everyone sends me, and they report their sleep, their motivation, their energy levels, and, everything. Again, life meets optimal. So if they keep telling me that, well, they're losing weight and they're gaining in the gym, but, they're just dreading going to the gym and they're not sleeping well and their wife is crazy and, whatever. I tend to take that into account because we're working with people, not robots. So at least for the time being, who knows what happens in another decade of AI. But we need to treat people like we truly understand them. And sometimes I push them because I think it's good for them, but sometimes I allow them to actually be, I'm a compassionate coach. I'm a compassionate but tough love type of coach. So when I believe someone needs to be pushed because they need to, they have more of a victimized mindset, then I do that and I motivate them to do that. Because at the end of the rainbow, there's a pot of gold. But some that are constantly punishing themselves and forcing everything, and, it's all about discipline and willpower and whatever. Well, I think we need to connect that with what do you actually want? Are your strategies getting you what you want, or are you just, beating yourself to death because you believe that's what you deserve? So again, psychology, mindset, work with what you have, and become curious about the client. Don't treat them like numbers on a spreadsheet.
So well said. I'm nodding away here because the way, I don't know how your coaching actually works, but the way ours does is we get like a video diary sent from a client and they talk through their training, nutrition. And so you really build a relationship with them to the point where you understand how they tick. And so I know exactly what you're talking about in terms of there's those clients where you're like, you just need to give them a bit of a shove, kick up the arse now and then, but do it in a tough love kind of way. But you have those other ones who are just highly motivated. They always push themselves into the ground too far sometimes. They may be a bit hyper focused on some things that they want to be optimal in this scenario, but you're like, actually just de-stressing is going to help you more. So kind of pushing and pulling with that. How did you have similar ways of checking in, or how do you get that level of connection with your clients?
Well, I tend to have both. I have some clients that are just mainly numbers and spreadsheets and subjective reports in written form. But if I deem it necessary, it all depends on the application. And I try to at least have a talk with everyone, like a Zoom call. And I recommend either like an email-based coaching where we just, you write whatever you need to on a weekly basis or even a daily basis, and I provide you with directions to do what you do. But my high-end coaching is where I work with people on weekly or bi-weekly calls for 30 to 45 minutes. Sometimes the first session is 90 minutes because we need to dig really deep into their whole mindset and life philosophy. So, and those are probably the most dramatic transformations I do with my clients, where I'm able to actually build their mindset and psychology as well as their physiology. So, but I also have a cap on how many I can work with, simply because it's a very deep type of work. So it's a different price model, obviously, than just sending someone a program and adjusting it based off of their weekly feedback. So I do both, and I will say I enjoy the talking to people and connecting and transforming their entire perspective on themselves and their life.
Yeah, I can tell. I can get that from you, and it's the same with myself. Although we have slightly different models, being able to have that kind of human connection is just invaluable with like trying to actually truly transform someone and the way they think about their training, nutrition, but also themselves, like you said, and the mindset surrounding it all. So I love those aspects. Something you mentioned there as we were talking, and I definitely agree in regards to some of these studies where they're seeing quite a large percentage growth increase. It's how long is that sustainable for realistically? I always talk about it with my clients where they kind of think, oh, more volume is better. But I'm like, you might be able to recover from it for like, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks, but we want this program to last us for like months, hopefully. So
and look into the individual results, where you have people losing muscle and you have some gaining a ton of muscle. So, and sometimes I saw one study where they repeated the exact same protocol with the same set of subjects and predicted that the high responders would keep being high responders, and suddenly they switched places. So the low responders ended up being a high responder in the second study, and vice versa. And that just again shows us, can we really sustain those amazing results that we managed to get in the first 12 weeks, the subsequent 12 weeks, and rarely they do.
And I think that brings me back to your point on autoregulation, because hopefully with the right autoregulative kind of feedback and tools, you can get them to where they should be versus like, again, losing muscle. Like if you're using autoregulation correctly, you should never be in a position where that's likely to occur. So I think that's where that can be really valuable. Something you did mention is, and I think I've heard some people have this argument of, and I don't know, it feels a little bit defeatist to me in some way, but you might have a different perspective, is we're all eventually going to get to the same kind of endpoint. And I don't know if you can call this like a genetic limit. So what's the rush of kind of trying to get more gains in a shorter term perspective? Do you think that's true? Do you think no matter what kind of program you're following now, you're going to hit this limit? Or is there something to trying to grow as much as possible whilst, I don't know, you're young and younger and in an environment where you can keep growing until sarcopenia kind of hits you in the arse?
Well, I will say this. I just turned 50 on Friday, and I believe I'm in better shape now than when I was in my 20s, because I stopped doing, stupid, destructive shit to myself. And that takes years to get rid of all of those mindsets and habits and, trying to rush everything. So being impatient and being in the rush can work against you. It can work with you in the short term and work against you in the long term. And it did for me. I just ended up getting injured and losing motivation and going through these cycles of losing and regaining the same amount of muscle mass. So I think being impatient, you will eventually create bottlenecks in your bioenergetics or physiology. There's like a muscle is connected to bone with tendons. We need oxygen and nutrient supply. We have mitochondria. We have cardiovascular system. We need to supply muscles with nutrients. Our long-term health, inner organs, everything is dependent not only on the big muscle, but on everything working. So I truly believe some have probably not tapped out their genetic or hormonal potential. Some perhaps have limited their hormonal potential because they're constantly depriving themselves of nutrients and not sleeping well and, binge drinking every weekend. So even though I truly believe genes and hormones ultimately decide how big and muscular you're able to get, some are probably holding themselves back from achieving those last 5 to 10% because they simply haven't cracked the code yet and are doing self-destructive things they believe are optimal but aren't. So I think looking at it as a long-term process of figuring out what works, being data-oriented, looking at the numbers, being willing to experiment, stop being on social media and thinking someone else out there has the answer, it will probably get you there eventually, instead of the constant chase for the magic pill or that new study that will eventually give you the magic recipe for success. This goes not only for training and nutrition, but for business and relationships and, everything in your life. So we need to become more curious about our own process and what actually works, constantly challenging ourselves, pushing ourselves sometimes, but pulling back and allowing growth to actually happen. Using the first principle thinking philosophy of challenging your own beliefs and trying to imagine what if the opposite is true. Generally just being curious about yourself and life instead of thinking everyone else has the answer. Because I've worked with top athletes. I worked with clients that are making $100 million. We're all insecure. We all just fake it till we make it and believe, that we either deserve better or have figured it all out, depending on who you talk to and when you talk to them. So we're just all trying to figure shit out. But on the outside, it seems as if everyone knows what they're doing. And they don't. I don't. Yeah. And I think we should be more open and humble and understanding of that, be more self-compassionate and have more patience. Life is about more than just figuring out what's optimal in every direction. So another round for me, but whatever.
I enjoyed it. I really relate to that perspective. Hopefully it's a sign of maturity here that I'm kind of relating to that. And I think a lot of people do end up getting in their own way, unfortunately. It's like you said, maybe they listen to every single episode of this podcast because they're hoping there's going to be these, golden tidbits that they can start employing into their training. And now they're going to see the growth that they wish they had seen. But unfortunately,
it's secret.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, I'm going to quote you here because this was something I pasted into my notes. It was the main drivers of your success. Number one was finding a good training and nutrition plan to put on autopilot, which I completely agree with. 2, make small incremental additions or subtractions to see if you improve. And you talked about Bruce Lee and his sort of philosophy there, which works in great. 3, consistency, tiny gains compounded over time. And like you can apply this to, I don't know, investing, into like relationships, so many things. And then 4 was a mindset of delayed versus instant gratification. Stop getting so hung up on irrelevant details and start engaging with the richer experiences of life beyond the gym walls. And I just thought it was a fantastic quote or thing to put out there that unfortunately I think is going to fall on deaf ears for some people now, but hopefully if maybe they revisit it and they hear it and they're like, oh, now I kind of understand it, because I think sometimes you have to learn from your mistakes and go through some cycles of not doing so great, and then you come back and revisit.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes life just has to punch you in the face until you learn. So, I mean, that's what the hormosis, that's learning is all about. Same inputs, different behavior. So if you keep just doing the same thing over and over, you by definition haven't learned anything. So I think learning is what it's all about, figuring out shit, solving problems. That's what makes us happy. It's not having a six-pack.
Yeah, for sure. Børge, thank you so much for your time. This has been a great chat. I think, like I said, off air or maybe or even on air, on my research, I know you got deep into philosophy. So I think I might have to bring you back on to talk about that in future, because I think that'll be really interesting for people. I certainly found it interesting. But again, if people want to keep up to date with you, like we said, you're now on YouTube and Instagram. Where should they head?
Yeah, probably Instagram most of all. Exploring other platforms. I'm kind of OCD about that, or impulsive. I want to, see what all of these different platforms, they have a different energy. So I'm still playing around with stuff. But go to myo-reps.com, which is, where you can get my ebook. And from there, you can get into a community I have to sort of play around with the philosophy and the training part of things. So yeah, those are the main places right now, but maybe you'll see me on, I just started some stuff on LinkedIn and Twitter. We'll see what happens. I haven't decided yet.
Okay.
But I just want to thank you, Steve, because I mean, you're doing really great work. I admire you. I follow you and see your physique updates, and the progress you're making. It's just mind blowing. Yeah, you're doing great work, man. So, I'm cheering for you.
I appreciate that a lot. Hopefully I can bring it home for the team in some shape or form. I'll do my best. And thank you so much again, Børge, for your time. I'll make sure those links are in the description below. And guys, we'll catch you next time.
Yeah.
Losing weight fast while maintaining muscle mass. Sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? It isn't though. It's reality and we know how to do it. And we will help you achieve this. The Minicut Movement is an 8-week fat loss program to make you lose a huge chunk of fat while maintaining muscle mass at the same time. We will support you from the beginning to the end so that you see the results you would like to and come out of it much stronger. You'll receive a fully automated spreadsheet that is based on your nutritional needs. You can choose between 6 different male and female training templates. Over 30 videos will guide you through each and every single step of the Minicut so that you're getting the most out of your journey and that you always know what to do. But the best thing is that you can start whenever you want. The Minicut Movement is open 24/7. So if you want to learn more or you're ready to sign up, hit the link in the description below. So let's revive stronger together.